Kris Legacy is a student at Pima College in theater and a brave first storyteller. So let's welcome him.
Hello. Hi. So when people kind of get into like my inner sanctum, I get very into like heavy topics, and that can happen very quickly. There's been first dates where I'm like, let's talk religion right now, just to get it out of the way, because I find it very fascinating. I grew up Roman Catholic, but you know, it wasn't until I went to Catholic school that I learned what being trans was, and they were like, bad. And I said, okay, we're gonna go somewhere else with this. And so I lately, at least in the last couple years, have found a very deep love of like the occult and paganism, mostly through a cultural lens, but I also find it's very good for like meditation. Like prayer doesn't work for me, but tarot cards, great, same thing. And so with tarot cards, if you don't know what those are, you have like this big deck, and it's a little too big for my hand, so I end up dropping them everywhere every single time. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no worries, thank you. Yeah, and in like history, I would say it was more of a card playing game, but once it got more into like a spiritual side, it's more of like, I would say like fortune telling and like divination. So that's more what I like to play with. Like I'm not cool enough to tell the future, but I like to pretend sometimes. So it's fun for me. And so to try to meditate, I'll go and I'll get all these different tarot decks. I mostly collect them because like they're pretty, kind of like rocks. And my favorite deck has like these crows all over them, so that's great for me. And the one card that I come back to every single time is the Wheel of Fortune. So the names can be kind of deceiving, right? The first 22 cards when you are using it for fortune telling are called the major arcana, and they have to do with like major themes in your life. So the Wheel of Fortune, it might sound like it's more about like, oh, I'm gonna be like rich, I'm gonna be famous. It's more like things are gonna change and you gotta deal with that. Like you're gonna learn. You're either on top of the wheel or it's crushing you, deal. And it's a cool thing. I mean, either like you're on high or you're gonna be there eventually. And you know, over time, I wasn't always cool with the idea of change, but once you kind of learn that this is neutral and unfeeling, you just kind of learn to deal with it. One kind of change in my life that was both like horrifying and fascinating for me to kind of learn about is me and my dad are like the same person. So yeah. And you know, the very first thing that I would say we have in common, it's been a very good like icebreaker for me because I'm not always like the most social, easy to pull out of my pocket. On my dad's 47th birthday, I was born. So we get to share the same birthday every year. And you're like, that you cannot get a birthday gift like that. Well, so my mom's a copycat because my dad's first wife did that with my sister Jessica like 30 years prior. So whatever, not that cool. You know, we would read like we would read Reader's Digest together, always like the big print because neither of us can see. And we watch like American Pickers together, all these different things. And on my like birthday, I guess, like very first day, they were gonna name me Christopher because they were expecting a boy. They later got one and they were not appreciative of that. But whatever, I saved the name for later. The middle name that they did give me though was like, oh my gosh, you are speedrunning, giving a child a complex because they gave me the name Legacy. And I was like, ooh, this is like really heavy, but I'll hold it, whatever. I can't get rid of it, I'm too attached.
Okay.
And I guess, I'm trying to think how to put this. My dad, in a way, held like a lot of shame for the life that he had, and he was trying very hard to not have that like bleed into his kids. He was unsuccessful, he tried, so we'll give him points. He grew up in the 1950s in Vermont, so this is not like a great time financially, historically, all that. His family was, like he grew up with his uncle because his parents were not present. His mom was too mentally ill to like deal with her children, and his dad had a very exciting career in tax evasion, so he could not be home. years later, he would get into a fist fight with one of his teachers because he wanted to skip school and smoke. And so they said, okay, you're expelled. And he was like, well, darn, what do I do about that? It is still Vietnam era, but the war's coming to a close, but he figured, well, I need to be doing something. So he tried to go to the Navy, and the Navy said, you're a dropout, we don't really want you. And so instead, a Marine materialized behind him and said, kid, I'll buy you a donut. And so that's how my dad ended up in San Diego as a Marine, trying to get his GED. Now, I can't super blame my dad for a lot. Like I said, he tried. He had 10 kids, and so dealing with all the financials of that, and being a Vietnam veteran and everything, I get that. And I also did not expect to get through high school. With a lot of things that I went through as a kid, I was very maladjusted, and so I decided at 13, I'm going to die before I'm 18. And then we won't have to worry about any of it, it's fine. I have very bad escapism tendencies now, but it's fine. And so, the thing with the Wheel of Fortune is that you're walking along with it, and you're okay, I can see the paths ahead, I know where we're going. And then I'll go, I hit a rock, and we're going somewhere super different, and you're just gonna learn to deal again. And you go, okay, because what else are you gonna do? So at 17, it was Spirit Week in school. I was in senior year, and every morning I had to go to my dad's house to check on him. He was very disabled and ill. And so that morning, I was like, oh, you're dead. Darn, that sucks. And so my mom, dealt with everything. I had to go live with her. And I suddenly am at graduation. And I'm like, I didn't plan this far ahead. Oof. So, because to me, graduating was on the same level as other random plans I'd come up with for fun, like joining the French Foreign Legion, going to a cloister to be a nun, any of those things. And then you're suddenly there, and you're like, oh no. And so originally, I was going to go into nursing. Both my parents were LPNs, and I was like, we're just gonna do the same thing. But again, escapism, I was like, I cannot live in the same town my whole life, I will die. And so instead, I became part of the military machine as well, being not up there in income. And they were Air Force, and I said, okay. And so I ended up in Monterey, California, not far from where my dad had been. And he in fact had lived in Monterey for a little while. Now Monterey is supposed to be a very clean slate for me. I was like, we're just gonna ignore everything back in Virginia. It's fine. We don't have to remember any of this. So instead, I'm where my dad used to live, and I'm having all these stories going through my head that he would tell me. My dad had also guarded the Berlin Wall in Germany in his time in the army, and so every day before class I had to walk past this giant chunk of the Berlin Wall and be like, yeah, my dad, cool, we're gonna remember this forever. And I was like, I can pretend well enough. Turns out you cannot pretend that you were mentally well, not for ever. And so when my mom, who I tried to cut off and be like, don't ever talk to me again, she flew to California no warning. And I was like, okay, we can be reasonable about this. Either I can ignore her, I can be confrontational, or what's behind door number 3? Swallow a bunch of pills. So I did that instead. And I ended up, to nobody's surprise but my own, in mental health facility. And then I had my very first therapist. And it was really good for me because she said, hey, do you know what a generational cycle is? And I was like, no. And she was like, okay, we're gonna learn. I was like, okay. So I'm very passive about all this. But yeah, no, it was actually very, very good for me because I was like, okay, I can be all these things happen to me, but also one thing my dad never learned, accountability. So I was like, there's 2 paths in front of me. Once again, I can either become my dad. I can be somebody whose children only ever got together, all as one group for his funeral. Or I can be happy one day. So I like the second one, so that's what I went with. It's a pretty good choice. And so I guess with that, they gave me the middle name Legacy. Okay, he wanted me to be a lawyer. I'm not doing that. I'm gonna choose my own thing. And he liked to say that all his children were arrows into the future, but he's not aiming it. I'm doing that kind of thing. But yeah, so as the wheel is turning, I've come to accept that I can't, through all of that, really choose where it's going, but I can try to make